Beloved chickpea, my lovesick infatuation treasures your unsatisfied burning. My heart fervently hungers for your wish. You are my affectionate adoration.
Hello and welcome to One Cool Thing, a podcast from indie game studio Die Gute Fabrik, hosted by me, Hannah Nicklin. We're here to talk about one cool thing, not from games, which is really fascinating someone who makes games right now. I'm going to introduce them in a second, and then we're going to talk about the one cool thing that they've brought to the conversation and consider how it's shaping how they think about their work. So it's a chance to hear more about the practices of cool folks working in games, and hopefully also somewhere where we can all reflect on how we think about how we make things. So, without further ado, let's meet our guest. Right, so let's welcome the wonderful human being, Jake Elliott, to the podcast. Jake is probably most well known for being one third of Cardboard Computer, who made the era-defining and extraordinarily ambitious Kentucky Route Zero series. But he's also a musician, runs an excellent Patreon where he teaches and shares his practice as a writer-programmer, and he makes artware, which is art made with and about software, which is like super interesting to me. Computers and software shape our lives. They're things we think through and with, and where we learn and communicate and fall in love and do our shopping and influence others and argue and propagate conspiracy theories and plot the downfall of governments, and all of those things happen with and through these things. And I'm super interested in anyone who is practicing in the space of reflecting on what we build and how what we build builds us in turn. Jake, am I allowed to tell people that we're writing a book together too?
Yeah, I love that.
Like maybe if I say that when we're really like committed to actually finishing the book, which is a thing. So we are lightly dancing around the idea of writing a book together on the poetics of game writing tools, which means that we've been doing some thinking together recently. So I'm going to do my best to not speak in shorthand together and make sure that I'm always making sure that the listeners have things defined and stuff. So if I occasionally interrupt you and go, we should probably define this term we're quite used to using together, then that's why that happens. But yeah, welcome. Is there anything that you want to sort of add to that introduction, dispute, anything like that?
No, that's very, very kind. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I call Kentucky Route Zero a series, but then halfway through saying that, I was like, is it a series? Is it a like it's not a triptych, it's a quintritch.
Yeah. Something like that. No, yeah, it felt like a series working on it because we released it piece by piece over really long time. So yeah, it had that kind of series. I mean, it felt to us when we finished it like we had made 10 games, really. Yeah.
You did though. I mean, you made a lot of interludes.
Right.
You made installation pieces. It's really an incredible body of work. So I mean, I guess congratulations.
Thank you.
So yes, okay, but you're not here to talk to us necessarily about Kentucky Route Zero. We're here to talk about one cool thing, and in particular, the one cool thing that's sort of interesting you at the moment. What is that?
Yeah, well, I've been interested in a lot of work by this guy Christopher Strachey, and in particular in his love letters, which are really unusual and interesting. We have lots of correspondence from famous writers, and this correspondence, so to speak, is pretty unusual because it's all sort of computer generated, and it was an early. I guess it's been sort of viewed now from the 21st century as maybe one of the first pieces of electronic literature or computer-based literature. I could just kind of dive into what it is, sort of what his love letters were, how they.
Yeah, I mean, just to add that we're going to make sure that the liner notes contain this really excellent essay by Rhizome, their Queer History of Computing series, which goes into a bunch of depth, which I'm sure we'll also hit on here. But for those who'd like to read more, there'll be a link in the liner notes as well. But yeah, tell us more about this 1952 piece of software art.
Yeah. So the kind of context for it was built for a very early computer called the Manchester Mark I, which was at the University of Manchester, and this was in that computer was being put together in 1950 or so, and Strachey was Yeah.
I was just
Sorry.
going to say,
Yeah. No.
and
No.
when
No.
we
Yeah.
say computer in that era,
Yeah.
they're as big as a room, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like
Right.
those computers were full of like beautiful glass valves, and they
Yeah.
genuinely were like filled these sort of huge rooms. So when you imagine the Manchester Mark II, imagine a room-sized computer.
Yeah, totally amazing objects and spaces to inhabit. In fact, Strachey eventually was hired to work at the computer lab. I believe it was the computer lab at the University of Manchester, but what a computer lab was, then like I think of a computer lab as a room full of computers, but the computer lab was like a room that was also a computer, and they're sort of all inside of it, making it work and developing it, and so Strachey had kind of he came into computers like kind of late in his life. He had been a physicist and a mathematician and a school teacher, and he was a friend of Alan Turing, the very famous computer scientist, like maybe sort of foundational computer scientist Alan Turing. They went to school together at University of Cambridge, and they stayed in touch. They were both like gay in England at the same time, and had similar social circles. So I don't know if they were involved or not, but they were friends, and they sort
The
of,
college
yes.
that they went to at Cambridge as well, King's College, around that time was particularly famous for both Marxism and being gay. So like, not to say that you definitely were a Marxist and gay if you went to King's College at that time, but that it's in that way that these things were illegal back. Well, Marxism wasn't illegal, but being gay certainly was, or practicing, as it was phrased at the time, homosexuality. But yeah, those are particularly like one of the things that college was known for. So producing, in any case, quite radical thinkers at the time, before the Cold War anyway. I don't think that colleges were famous for being Marxist after the Cold War, because
Interesting, right?
definitely got stamped out. Anyway, sorry.
No, yeah. So that was kind of his connection to computing and computers, was this friendship with Alan Turing, and Turing designed a computer in the 40s called the Pilot Ace, and Strachey got wind of that computer, and he decided to. I think I read that Strachey had read this article about sort of mathematical models of a few different games. And he thought, I could maybe build like a computer program that played drafts, which I call checkers, but I understand he is English, so they call it drafts, right? You all call it drafts. And he built this. It was, by some accounts, like really the first video game, and in a sense, the first computer game, we could say. It's really a murky distinction to make, because what's a computer, what's a game, and so on, But yeah, he built this program to play drafts, and with Turing's help, he was able to get it to run on this new computer that at Manchester University, or at University of Manchester, and he developed from that program that he wrote, the drafts program, a reputation as being this like prodigal programmer. Like they called him the man who wrote perfect programs, because he did such a impressive job with that program. And another, so he made a video game, the drafts program. Then he made a bunch of programs that played music on the computer, which is the earliest computer music I've ever heard of. And then another program that he made during this time that he was kind of collaborating with Turing, was this program called Love Letters. So the Love Letters program, it was it's kind of hard to think about how to describe it, because I have such a 21st century sort of frame and idea of what it was, but at the time it was really I'm not sure how he thought of what he was doing then. But now, we kind of looking back, we kind of think of the Love Letters program as being a form of like combinatorial poetry, or combinatorial literature. This is a term that we use a lot now, where it's all about you have a sort of space of possibilities. There's a sort of a set of rules for generating love letters, and then there's a finite number of possible permutations. Similarly, Strachey, he got, I think, like Roget's thesaurus, and looked up all these synonyms for some words that you might find in a love letter. He also got, I think, some assistance from his sister Barbara Strachey, who is a writer, professional writer, and he built this algorithm that generates these love letters. I have a few of them I could read.
I also printed one out
good.
to read. So why don't you do one, and then I'll do one, and maybe they'll feel interestingly different as well, with different voices.
Beloved chickpea, My lovesick infatuation treasures your unsatisfied burning. My heart fervently hungers for your wish. You are my affectionate adoration. My heart hopes for your passion. My fondness thirsts for your fervent desire. Yours keenly, MUC.
Beloved duck, my fondness hungers for your wish. You are my eager infatuation, my lovable enchantment, my loving ambition. My lust clings to your fervent appetite. Yours affectionately, MUC.
MUC stands for Manchester University Computer. Wow, my lust clings to your fervent appetite. That's so evocative.
My loving
Yeah.
ambition as well. That one gets me. Duck I love because duck is what everyone in the North calls everyone. Like, all right, duck.
Oh.
And like, even the most sort of like mask men will call other men duck. It's
yeah, nice. Like love or something I've heard.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
watching
pretty much the same. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so the way that this thing worked, like I just kind of described a little bit. It's about sort of combining all these synonyms that he had programmed into it, and there is a really nice pair of essays about Christopher Strachey's work by an artist named David Link, who's this German artist who's done like really a lot of research and writing and made a few artworks that reflected on Christopher Strachey's work, and David Link's essays go into really deep technical detail about the way that these things worked, and I'll skip most of that, but basically there's a sort of a template. So it's like, you are my adjective noun, and it's at some points when it's generating the poem, it has like a couple different branches that it can go on. So it can say either my adjective, noun, adverb, verb, your adjective, noun. That's what, or it can say this, you're my adjective, noun. And if you, there are several like recreations of this online, and maybe we can link some in the liner notes. I have a few links, but one of them was I think by Nick Modfort, and then there are a few others. Nick Modfort is like a writer and sort of computer poet. Has done some research into this also. And he built like a series of recreations of classic works of electronic literature, including this one and some others from the late 20th century. And that's kind of interesting because you can look at his code. In David Link's essays, he also recreated the algorithm using modern programming languages, because at the time in 1952 there weren't actually even really programming languages per se. The development of what we now call programming languages followed only a few years later. But at that moment, all computer programming was completely machine specific. So there was no sense of running the same program on different computers. There was no idea like that. And the instructions that what kind of made the Manchester University computers sort of special is that it was one of the first computers that used this architecture. I think it's called stored program architecture. And the basic idea is that you're storing the code in the same memory that you store the sort of the data. And it sounds completely mundane now. It's like, what else would you do? But that was an idea that Alan Turing had, and then some other computer scientists and mathematicians like John von Neumann developed the idea more, and then they started building these actual devices implementing Turing's ideas in the late 40s and early 50s. And I find it really interesting to see Christopher Strachey exploring the sort of linguistic, the relationship between language and computers in this early moment before computers had a sort of language of their own. It kind of seems like it might be a really important kind of moment to look at it just in the history of like the evolution of language of computers, just as this sort of like right before this transition.
Yeah, and I mean also we shouldn't let go that Christopher Strachey was queer, that he was gay.
Yeah.
And that the Rhizome article is part of this sort of queer history of computing. There's definitely something about writing these love letters with this machine, producing things which are both awkward and surprising, and 3 steps removed, in the context of an era when homosexuality is still illegal in the UK, right?
Mm.
And that Christopher Strachey's desire was, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that, I mean, obviously there's a class thing, right, which is sort of protecting Christopher Strachey. It didn't protect everyone, and protection is maybe not even the right word. Insulation, I'm not sure, but that he's gone to this college, which people are in sort of the background, more comfortable with their homosexuality, and also that some of his like circle, like you can connect like Christopher Strachey with the Bloomsbury group, who are famous kind of like feminist, queer, kind of literary theory people, like kind of discussing stuff again, like way even before 1952.
Yeah.
So I think in that context, I don't want us to drop sort of that area of things. Not saying that it's not something that he was sort of racked by in the same way as another person might have been, because obviously he was exposed to people who were like accepting of their homosexuality. But it's an era when it's illegal. It's an era where it's not spoken about. And I think that there's something like super interesting in writing love letters as a gay man with a computer, and with these. I mean, maybe he was trying to make them perfect, but I think there's something super interesting for me, and we don't know what Christopher Strachey felt in their awkwardness as well. Something really beautiful and special there, which, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting read of it, and you mentioned Jacob Gabori, who wrote the this Rhizome articles, a queer history of computing, and which are super interesting. I know he's been working on a sort of book length treatment of this idea, and I'm really curious to see it. He also wrote he published an article last year about that touches on some of this stuff, and I found a pretty interesting near the end of that article, which I'll find a link to. He sort of interpreted this as camp, basically, like which is So I have a quote from that paper I could share real quick. This is again Jacob Gabori. He said, in tasking a computer with the camp performance of romantic attachment, Turing and Strachey ultimately lay bare its inability to attain the true expression of romantic feeling. Indeed, the comedic quality of the program is found in this gap between what the program promises to do and its output. Thinking with the history of computing, we might approach this gap as a failure or a lack to be repaired through the development of artificial intelligence over the subsequent 70 years. But as with the historical claim for nearly all computational systems, we might presume that given enough time and computing power, we might one day close this gap. And yet, read through the affects of Turing and Strachey, the love letter program suggests just the opposite, that the lack implicit in the future, this is getting kind of dense here. I could probably cut out part of this. This is getting, I just wanted to read this important part. He says, read through the affects of Turing and Strachey, the sort of like what they were going through, what they were dealing with. The love letter program maybe suggests that they were trying deliberately to, he says, dwell in the gap between the love and the letter, which I found a really evocative way of describing it. And I think it's kind of what you're talking about there. It's like there's some distance between the way that their love was able to be expressed at that time, because, as you say, it was illegal, and in fact, Turing was effectively murdered for his homosexuality by the state,
and like all of what I said about their class in some ways insulating them and the circles that they moved in. Turing was the term is chemically castrated by the government, because he was working at Bletchley Park. He was involved in obviously massive efforts to bring World War II to a close, and the government needed him, but they their reasoning, I guess maybe we shouldn't air, but had been said that they thought he was a security threat because he was gay, essentially.
Right.
And the chemical castration being that, and there's lots of things about, so he poisoned himself, was put the poison in an apple. Some people say it was an accident. Some people say he didn't want to hurt his family. But it is the British government's fault that Turing died when he did.
Right.
And it was the persecution of gay men in particular, which is the reason that he died. And I think only very, very recently was an apology issued from the British government.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, as you say, it's really a striking piece of in the history of electronic literature or computer literature. For one thing, because of the time when it happens and the sort of excitement of being early on, but then of course because it says so much about that moment and it has this kind of critical, it read in the way that Gaburi proposes here. It has this kind of critical reflection on the times. Yeah.
There are perhaps some people who would say, let a gay man make some art and not have to be about being a gay man.
Sure.
Like we need to hold that possibility as well.
Sure.
I think the word camp is super interesting to me that you bring up
Yeah.
there. Like I was just Googling because I've been massively ruined by the Met Gala's camp theme that they did.
Oh,
I don't know if for those not
no.
familiar with the Met Gala, the Met Gallery in New York does this like fundraising gala where all the most famous fashion people in the world come together and they dress up in around a theme. And one of the most recent ones was the theme was camp, and there was just a lot of people really failing to meet the failing to meet the brief on camp, just like looking too cool or just
Yeah.
like I don't know, but so I've been ruined by that. I was like, what do I think the word camp means? And I was just googling it now. Apparently derived from the French "se camper," to pose in an exaggerated fashion. Apologies to any
Oh,
French listeners on my pronunciation there. And then it says here later it evolved to a general description of the aesthetic choices and behavior of working class gay men.
interesting. Yeah.
Now, I don't have my citation here is Wikipedia, so the source on that is a 1978 book by Esther Newton, Mother Camp, Female Impersonators in America. So they're actually obviously drawing that definition from an American context, which is just interesting in general. But yeah, camp is an interesting word, like kind of to pose is
Yeah.
an exaggerated pose. Like there's definitely something there that connects to the way that Strachey plays with language using this program.
Yeah, and I think he wrote an article about a year later after doing this love letter program. He wrote an article about the program and for this literary journal called Encounter, which it was sort of infamous because it was secretly funded by the CIA too. But anyway, Strachey wasn't involved in that, but he happened to publish in this magazine that has this funny history. But anyway, in that he described a little bit. He sort of described a little bit what he was trying to do, kind of hinted at it, and he did say that he selected the thesaurus, Roget's thesaurus, as a source because it gave the whole thing a sort of artificial Victorian feel. So I think it's clear that he was, it wasn't meant to be read straight, well, I mean, in any sense, but it wasn't meant to be read as completely sincere in, these love letters.
You've done a really good job of sort of introducing us to the work and stuff. But I suppose part of this sort of podcast and ask you to bring a thing in is not just why the thing is cool, but how it's sort of making you think. And I wonder if you remember when you first came across Love Letter and like how it made you feel and why it piqued your interest.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of interesting. Christopher Strachey has become he's become better known in the art world or the literary world because of this work and the drafts program recently, but he's actually better known in the computer science world for something that he did about 10 years later, which was this theory he established called denotational semantics. And I won't get into it too much detail because it's pretty deep, pretty complex, but what it is, it ties into some stuff that he was talking about even very early on, and it's a theory of meaning of computer programming languages. So a lot of people, especially now in 2023, are a bit hostile to the idea that programming languages should be meaningful at all. right? The kind of standard understanding of what a programming language is that it's like a set of instructions for some machine, and there's maybe not a specific machine anymore, but for some kind of abstract machine. So I actually found Strachey's work while I was researching that. I was looking into like what could a computer program mean, and the question is important for me because my during the work that I did on Kentucky Route Zero, I think I kind of uh, unintentionally I was sort of refining this practice of writing computer games, of like a sort of writing centric design, and a language centric design, and I've realized, kind of looking back at some of my early work, that I was really playing with this idea of like making a new language for every game, and then the design process of the game is trying to write different sort of expressions and texts in that language. And so maybe as an engineer approaching programming, I might not be as interested in the meanings of the code. It sounds a little abstract. But as a writer, like I am interested in the meanings. That's how I relate to the practice of writing, to the process of writing. It's like put down, try to communicate clear meanings.
Wonder if you could, because I'm following you because we have a lot of conversations at the moment for our book. And one of the reasons I'm so drawn to you as a thinker, Jake, is because you have this position as a writer programmer. You're not writing in a tool because you've sort of specialized particularly in just writing, and I wouldn't even describe you as a programmer who's learning writing, or vice versa. You really are this really super kind of pure thinker in that crossover space of like, I want to write with programming as a tool, and I want to make both words and programming perform for me in the light of the needs of the work that I'm producing, right? And people who are interested in this more can follow the Cardboard Computer Patreon, where you've been given sort of lectures and examples and stuff. But I wonder if for the listeners, you could do a really like clear example, perhaps from Kentucky Route Zero, of like a moment where you've been thinking about both of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe I could give a sort of yeah, for Kentucky Route Zero. I think there's one moment in, so the last act of Kentucky Route Zero is set in a very different kind of space than the rest of the game, and we wanted to have a really different feel from the rest of the game. So in most of the game, the game is all about like dialogue choices, or the part that I worked on anyway, is all these dialogue choices, and you're usually inhabiting sort of one character at a time, but you switch between characters very fluidly, and it actually gets more fluid as the game goes on, right? So in the final episode of the game, we wanted to kind of like continue that trajectory of kind of like broadening the perspective until the point where you really feel as if you are not inhabiting any single character at any moment. You're sort of always and it's this idea of like it's a sort of novelistic idea, right? It's like, so some of Faulkner's novels have this quality where it just feels like a cacophony of voices, and none of them is really dominant. And so in that case, I had to. So I'm writing the code for the dialogue system, and I'm writing the dialogue, and I had to kind of like go back and forth between those two things in order to add support for this new feature, where where you're kind of, usually the flow would be you make a choice and then the other character says something to you and then you say something back to them. And so it's kind of like putting the player in dialogue with the computer. In this moment, I didn't want anybody to be controlled by the computer anymore. So the player is speaking both sides of the conversation. And so it's really just a list of choices, and you choose what person A says, and then you choose how person B responds, and then how person A responds to that, and so on. And it was just like, I had to kind of like redo the code for how the dialogue system worked, because it was built on these assumptions that I'd established earlier in the game. And another like kind of touch point for me in kind of getting some clarity about what I was doing there was there's this talk or workshop really by John Ingold in 2018 at the Adventure X conference. It's called Sparkling Dialogue. It's like a really nice workshop about game writing, and he in that he kind of, so Ingold at Inkle, they make their own tool Ink in-house, right? And what I think is really, really cool about Ink is that it's very intentionally designed to support what they have identified as being the writing practices that they're excited about, the kind of like just writing techniques that they're excited about in interactive work. And in that workshop, he really threaded those two concerns together really nicely, and you can really see how the language Inc. is designed to support, like, making it easy to do these things that he thinks make for compelling game dialogue, including like being able to make small branches really simply instead of having, I don't know, it can be complex in some game writing tools to make a new branch. And this one, he makes it really easy. And some nice touches, like maybe when the player is presented with the options, the text reads one way, and after they choose the option, the text is rewritten to read a slightly different way. This is something they make use of a lot. Like in 80 Days, they use this technique a lot. And just those kind of like back and forth, dialogue between the tool, the code, and the sort of writing. And then also, I'm just like, I love that when you have natural language text and code sort of tangled together, they're like both, they're like oil and water. They don't completely mix and merge, but you can kind of like, as you're reading, you're sort of, and as you're writing, you're sort of switching modes. And I just think that like enlivens the whole process a lot. That's been my experience.
Is there anything that you can sort of take us through about how this has sort of continued to affect your practice? Like maybe where are you at now in terms of your thinking?
Yeah, so I'm exploring some of the ideas that Strachey kind of brought up later, this idea of like meaning in programs, and just, I'm interested in like lots of different theories of meaning, and Strachey's developed just one. But also in the love letter generator, I think some things that this brought up for me, just looking at it again a little more closely. There's this kind of like, so as we said, it's got this sort of template, like a grammatical template, and it's different parts of speech, adjective and noun and stuff like that. And there's that kind of systematization. But it's very actually kind of loose about that systematization. And that just suggests to me like a kind of interesting way of looking at language as being, there's linguistics is a really formalized study since basically Noam Chomsky in the 40s and 50s developed these very formal theories of like what language is, and they've really dominated the study of linguistics, not just computer linguistics, but like natural languages too. This is and Strachey's approach here is not that systematic. It's a bit more I think improvisatory in the way that it feels to me, and I think that's kind of interesting because it's just like a sort of a creative use of programming to explore the development of a text. And then also just the this idea of like this love letter generator is not, it's not a text, it's sort of like many texts. It's sort of like a space of possible texts. And I've been thinking about that too, as thinking, what are we doing when we're writing a computer game? We're maybe not writing a single text, but a sort of textual space that the player can explore, get lost in, play with, appropriate to their own ends in whatever way they can.
I'm just going to sort of begin kind of wrapping us up, but I wondered if there was anything that you felt like you were really excited about sort of sharing with the listeners that you haven't had a chance to chat about today.
Yeah, can I just tell you one thing about the way these computers work that I think is really wild?
Oh, I'd love you to.
Okay, so so Turing identified, he's like, if we're going to build a computer, the main problem is going to be memory. Like, how does the computer remember things? And the solution that some people came up with was basically to use radar technology for memory. So, and this actually, Strachey worked on radar in the war, and I think this helped him, give him a leg up on this. But so radar needs memory also, because in radar you send these pings out and you get pings back from things, and you want to only get a ping from something that is moving, right? So it needs to kind of remember that some things were there already. And so the way that they did that was with this acoustic delay line. And so it's like, it's basically like for radar, they would maybe sometimes do like a tube of liquid mercury, and a sound signal, like actual acoustic signal, would kind of go in a loop through the mercury to be the memory. So eventually, though, there was this, like CRT tubes, cathode ray tubes, like what used to be in televisions. Those could somebody discovered those could also be used for memory. And it's like you send an electron in there and it creates a static charge that sits on the surface of the screen for a little while and then fades away. And that was how the memory worked. And there was a sensor that would read it. And so a sort of like bizarre side effect of that, the way that they did memory, basically storing all the data for the Manchester University computer was stored on actual CRT screens. Like these are, and so you could see literally at all times the whole contents of the computer's memory just by looking at these screens that were not really being used as screens per se. They were being used as memories, but that's how they wrote these programs, was by doing the code and then looking into the computer's memory. It was just such a strange idea from 2023. Like, I have no sense of the possibility of looking at what's going on inside my computer visually, but it's actually what made Strachey able to make this checkers program, because the memory is the state of the board. And so while you're playing the game, you look at the computer's memory to see where the pieces are on the board. I just think it's a really amazing detail about these the first few computers in England in the 40s and 50s.
Is there anything you'd like to promote? Any places people can follow you if they want to sort of follow your work?
Yeah, you can. We've got this patreon.com/cardboardcomputers where we're doing this series of workshops. They're pretty irregular, but this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. And yeah, if you're interested in it, I'd be happy to have you. Anybody who's listening.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of One Cool Thing from Die Gute Fabrik. That was a really dense one, but I love the kind of thinking when you get to chat to Jake, and don't feel ashamed at all to listen to that a couple of times to really get into some of those things. Make sure you check out all of the links in our liner notes so that you can dive into some of those other articles. There's a lot of really, really cool writing about Christopher Strachey's practice, so do go check all that out. As usual, leave a rating or review where you can. If any of this conversation was of use or value to you, it's a really good way to say thank you. And then from our perspective, thanks to Nick Ellis for the music, Tom Wally for production, and I'll be back soon with a new episode speaking with another cool thinker and maker in the field of video games. And in the meantime, don't forget to check out Die Gute Fabrik on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, etc. We are GUTEFABRIK on most platforms. Gute Fabrik. Stay thoughtful, friends. Take care, and goodbye.
Honey Moppet. My fervor fervently hungers for your beautiful sympathy. My charm pants for your charm. My fondness longs for your eager hunger. You are my avid fervor, my covetous wish. Yours lovingly, MUC.
Fanciful duck, my breathless yearning eagerly pines for your seductive enchantment. You are my eager fellow feeling, my loving being. My winning being woos your ambition, my tender wish lusts after your lust. Yours burningly, MUC.
Beloved love, my sympathetic craving covetously hungers for your desire. You are my beautiful love, my sweet longing, my wistful charm, my covetous ambition. Yours beautifully, MUC.
Dearest sweetheart, my craving adoration woos your fancy. You are my eager heart, my curious wish, my craving fellow feeling. My enchantment longs for your wish. Yours curiously, MUC.
Darling love, you are my lovable enthusiasm, my winning love, my craving, my lovable thirst. My loving rapture yearns for your ardor. Yours anxiously, MUC.
Darling jewel, you are my wistful longing. My infatuation adores your fervour. My craving rapture anxiously sighs for your lovesick craving. You are my unsatisfied yearning. My passionate devotion eagerly lusts after your rapture. Yours covetously, MUC.